I'll bring this meeting to order. We'll start with the roll call.
Here.
Garou. Senator Larson.
Here.
Senator Smith. Here. And Chairman Salzar.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Great. Mr. Richards, good of you to be here. I'll give it over to you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Before you, you should have 5 handouts. I'll walk through them and then hand it over to Polly Scott to walk through some of the details. The first handout is a one-page handout. We refer to it as a high-level summary, and I will start there. Your second handout is the goldenrod, or the fiscal profile, dated February 10th, that's yesterday, 2025. The third document you have is a one-page report that looks like this. This is actually the official report that you are compiling at this meeting, and you will submit to your colleagues for the record. The fourth item is the detailed narrative of each of the adopted reports. And the fifth handout is a ledger size or tabloid size summary report. Referring back to the high-level summary, do all members have that? Yes, thank you. The House adopted 19 amendments, and we'll be walking through those amendments with you. The Senate adopted 28, so a difference of 9 amendments. There were 5 mirror amendments, and frankly, there were a couple that were very, very close, but they were not identical, and we'll walk through those as well. From the general fund side, the House had additional appropriations totaling $6 million rounded. The Senate had additional general fund appropriations of $9.1 million, a total difference there of 3.1. If you're looking for where that might be located on the fiscal profile, I would direct your attention to page 2, line 61. You can see the difference between the House position and the Senate position is that $3.137 million on line 61. In addition, both sides had an increase in contingent appropriations from the general fund. Those are not yet shown on the goldenrod because those contingencies technically have not been met. But on the House side, they added $72 million for purposes of backfill of local governments for property taxes. And the Senate had a somewhat similar position where the Crago amendment, you might recall, had a $15 million background, which was limited just to what I'll call first responders and healthcare special districts. I'm back on the high-level summary on line 5, and you also have a difference in the budget reserve account in terms of the reversions. The House made no changes, and on the Senate side, I believe it was the Dockstader amendment, which was subsequently modified by Senator Rothfuss, removed the reduction of $100 million in energy matching funds and large energy matching funds. On line 6, we identify without the budget balancer, because that really is not, it's just a formality. You do have a $60 million difference in the LSRA. This is related to wildfires, where the House has spent $40 million in grants, not loans, for wildfires and wildfire rehabilitation and restoration, and the Senate's position is $100 million in grants. You will also see a relatively modest difference in the school foundation program of $2 million. The House has a $163,500 increase, and the Senate is at $2.2 million. Again, this is identifiable on page 4, line 65 of the fiscal profile. And on line 8 of the high-level summary, the two houses have a difference in the water development account, number 1, where the House has appropriated $401,000 in additional spending, and the Senate does not have a similar increase. That is identifiable on page 6, line 31 of the fiscal profile. So all in, you will see the increase of all funds, including contingent appropriations, but not including that budget balancer, which would result in a double count. You will see the House added $119.4 million, and the Senate added $228.8 million for a difference of $109. You will also see on page 3 of the fiscal profile, the Legislative Stabilization Reserve account balances on line 63, where the House position ends with $1.3 billion and the Senate position ends with $1.142 billion. Again, I'm on page 3, line 63. And the nice thing about that LSRA in this particular year is it kind of funnels all of your profile account changes, because the general fund needs the LSRA to meet all of the appropriation obligations, and indeed the school foundation program needs a supplement from the LSRA to meet its appropriation obligations. So the difference between those two numbers is $165.1 or $165.2 million. That really is a good way to describe the total differences between the two houses. And how does that $165.2 million arrive? $100 million in energy matching funds, differences between the two houses, $60 million for wildfires, differences between the two houses, and $5.17 million difference in all other amendments on the general fund and the school foundation program. Dropping down to the bottom 5 lines, really the differences of the two houses, notwithstanding some relatively modest differences in smaller amendments, really just comes down to 3 issues. 1, how much money to provide the governor for his energy and large energy project matching funds. 2, the amount of grant funding for and loan funding in the House position for wildfire rehabilitation and restoration. And then finally, how much to provide a backfill, if any, to local governments for residential property tax reductions. You'll see I included line 15 and 16 in there, but 15 is the next biggest amendment, which is $4 million, and you have a mirror position. There is no difference in the preschool DD funding between the House and the Senate. So really, it's just lines 12, 13, and 14 are the big dollar items. The process today is under Rule 14 of the joint or mirror budget process. We have to provide you the summary of the House amendments, which Polly will walk through. The rule requires you to report to the floors, and we will provide that formal one-page report, which looks like this. That is typically voted on at the conclusion of today's meeting and then presented to your colleagues in one form or another in the Senate. When you present, there is a provision in the rules for a straw poll, meaning that the floor could vote on each amendment that the House did. That provision has not been invoked in 2 decades. So it really has been determined by prior committees to be not a useful use of your time, and that has been dispensed with. And then finally, once you provide that report, the Senate President and on the other side, the Speaker of the House have the opportunity to appoint 5 members from both chambers for the Joint Conference Committee on House Bill 1, Senate File 1. This year's bill will be a Senate file bill, which is submitted to the governor. The importance of that is it alternates back and forth between the houses, and that means that should the governor have any vetoes, it will be referred to the Senate first this year for any veto overrides. Additionally, just for your planning, before you is just the House positions. We had a similar presentation yesterday with the House Appropriations Committee with just the Senate. So after you go to the floors and provide this explanation in whatever form that may take, we will combine the 2 documents, House amendments and Senate amendments, and provide all members of the Joint Conference Committee a single sheet with all amendments on there. Just for background purposes, you have about 47 amendments. Last year, I think the combined total was about 130. So it is much narrower in terms of number of issues for you to resolve. And unless you have any questions, I will turn it over to Polly and again walk through this one page. Last year, I think it was about 8 or 9 pages of House amendments. This year, it's one page, double-sided. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Polly Scott, LSO, Budget Fiscal Division. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. I'm going to walk through the Standing Committee summary sheet for the House position. Just as Catherine and Elizabeth staffed the Senate side during Budget Week, Dawn and I staffed the House during Budget Week. So this is the results of the House position. This ledger-sized report that we're going to walk through is organized by identical amendments, related amendments, and then unrelated amendments. And the first 5 amendments are the identical amendments as determined by LSO. These are the ones that passed also in identical form on the Senate side. So starting out, we'll walk through each one. H 3004, sponsored by Representative Heiner, is a mirror to S 3002, sponsored by Senator Hicks. It pertains to the Department of Administration and Information, the Human Resources Division. It adds a footnote specifying a portion of the general fund appropriation may be used in order for the department to report to the Joint Appropriations Committee on all full-time employees and part-time employees authorized to work from alternate locations, including the total days employees worked at alternate locations. So basically, status of the teleworking that's being allowed. The next row, H 3007, sponsored by Representative Eklund, is a mirror to S 3003, sponsored by Senator Larson Dan. Pertains to the Department of Agriculture and in 6 different divisions listed there. It's a reduction of a customized amount of special revenue in each one of these divisions, totaling a decrease of $171,621 special revenue. Also adds a footnote specifying that not more than $7,987 in SR in aggregate is appropriated for the purpose of cost allocation or the 300 series for these divisions. And as a little bit of background on this, the cost allocation or the 300 series is what is budgeted to pay for shared services or overhead among all the different state agencies. And this kind of locks in the budgeted amount at the 2023 levels for this coming year. H 2008 corrected, sponsored by Representative Winter, is a mirror to S 2005, sponsored by Senator Hicks. Pertains to the Department of State Parks and Cultural Resources. It increases $35,000 general fund and adds a footnote specifying this one-time appropriation is for purposes of a display for the 1893 Yellowstone National Forest Reserve Survey Party Tree inscription. It was amended by H 3044 corrected, which was the technical amendment on the House side, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
And if I could interject here, this is one of 2 where staff exercised some subjectivity. At the end of the day, both houses ended at the same spot. There were different technical corrections on both amendments, but you ended with the same language. If you adopt this one, in all likelihood, just for transparency, what might be best is if you delete both of them and put in one clean amendment without the 2 errors in there, but you ended up in the exact same spot.
Thank you, John. The next one is H 2019, sponsored by Representative Larson Lloyd. It's a mirror to S 2011, sponsored by Senator Landon, pertaining to the Department of Health in the Behavioral Health Division. It's an increase of $4 million general fund, and adds a footnote specifying this appropriation is for the purposes of services to preschool children with disabilities, and that this appropriation shall be included in the standard budget for the next biennium. The final mirror or identical is H 2033, sponsored by Representative Heiner. And on the Senate side, it was S 2026, sponsored by Senator Dockstader. It's in section 323, the large project energy matching funds. And it's not new funds, but it adds language. It adds subsections H and J specifying $10 million S10 or LSRA funds is for the design and engineering of a project physically located within Wyoming that burns, combusts, or gasifies Wyoming coal. Additionally, appropriated funds will prioritize novel approaches to the mining and use of coal, rare earth minerals, critical minerals, and uranium. Moving on to the related amendments, H 3001, sponsored by Representative Nicholas, is related to S 3001, sponsored by Senator Garou. It pertains to the Office of the Governor in the Homeland Security Division, and it increases $200,000 from the Wyoming Tourism Reserve and Projects account for search and rescue operations, with the intent the appropriation is included in the standard budget. H 3003, sponsored by Chairman Bear, is related to S 2022, sponsored by Senator Driscoll, and also S 3013, sponsored by Senator Olson. It pertains to both the Office of the Governor and the Department of Education. In the Office of the Governor, it amends a footnote that was already there to specify that funds shall not be spent by the Office of the Governor for contract services or to support state personnel related to the Wyoming Charter School Authorizing Board. Then in the Department of Education's budget, it increases $163,500 from the S5 or the School Foundation Program and adds a footnote specifying this appropriation is for one at-will employee contract position for the Wyoming Charter School Authorizing Board, and that the appropriation shall be included in the standard budget for the next biennium.
And if I could just interject here, so on House 3001, the Senate's position is $400,000 for search and rescue from the general fund. The House's position is $200,000 from the Tourism Reserve and Projects account. Moving down to the next one, just to set up the differences, the House position is $163,500 from the SFP and an at-will employee, whereas the Senate's position included benefits. So it's a little over $200,000 and a full-time employee rather than an AWEC.
Thank you, Don. The next one is H 3044 corrected, sponsored by Chairman Bear, related to S 3030, sponsored by Chairman Salazar. This was the technical correction amendment on both sides. They were slightly different. On the House side, there were two grammatical corrections in the state parks and cultural resources. As you can see over in the narrative, one of them was to insert these before authorized, and the second one was to delete a shall. And then also in section 346, there was a technical correction to replace the word fund with the word account so that the name would align with the name that's in statute. And then in section 348, there was a grammatical correction to replace the plural appropriations with the singular appropriation.
And again, this one should not matter. Whatever amendments you agree on, we'll just put the appropriate technical corrections in with your direction.
Okay. H 2012, sponsored by Representative Larson Lloyd, is related to S 3006, sponsored by Senator Jones. It pertains to the state engineer, and it increases $148,000 general fund for the North Platte modeling and $401,504 in S1 or Water 1 funds, and increases authorized positions by 3 FTE. This is a restoration of the Gov's rec on the House side.
And on the Senate side, you'll recall, so this has about $550,000 and 3 FTE on the House side. On the Senate side, you approved $156,000 and 1 FTE, and it was unspecified as to whether it would be for the North Platte or the Colorado.
Okay. Moving on to H 3017, sponsored by Representative Haroldson. It's related to S 2008, sponsored by Senator Larson Dan, and S 3020, sponsored by Senator Crago. It pertains to both the Wildlife Natural Resources Trust and also Section 346, the Natural Disaster Mitigation Loans. The House amendment increases $40 million S10 or LSRA and adds a footnote specifying this one-time appropriation shall be continuously appropriated to the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resources Trust Account Board to provide grants to Wyoming conservation districts, weed and pest districts, and the Game and Fish Commission for purposes of restoring vegetation and preventing the establishment of invasive terrestrial vegetation or private and state lands destroyed by wildfires.
And on this one, you both adopted the same second reading amendment, which was the $40 million in grants. But then on the Senate side, you came in with a third reading amendment and increased that $40 million to $100.
Thank you, Don. And then additionally, the House amendment decreases what was initially in Section 346 for natural disaster mitigation loans from $100 million to $60 million. Moving on to H 3019, sponsored by Representative Larson Lloyd. It's related to S 2010, sponsored by Senator Driscoll, pertains to the Department of Health and the Healthcare Financing Division. It adds $833,153 general funds and a like amount of federal funds to restore the governor's recommendation for Medicaid behavioral health rate rebasing, with the intent that it be biennialized or doubled in the standard budget for the next biennium.
So this one is very close. It's almost mirror. You have the same amount of money. The Senate simply has a footnote explaining how it would be spent, and the House does not. So the only difference is some language. It's essentially the same.
Moving on to H 3034, sponsored by Chairman Bear. It's related to S 3028 corrected, sponsored by Senator Crago. It adds a new Section 300 titled Local Government Property Tax Grants. The House amendment increases $72 million general funds for property tax grants for counties, cities, and towns and special districts imposing the maximum mill levy in the 8 counties with the lowest total assessed valuations for the current tax year and all special districts statewide. The conditions are that the grants not exceed 75% of residential property tax reduction compared to tax year 24 and directly attributable to legislation exempting otherwise reducing residential property tax assessments enacted in the 25 general session. This amendment is contingent on passage of at least one of 10 different bills that are all related to property tax. They're listed there in your narrative. It's contingent on at least one of them passing without local government property tax compensation. And this amendment is also designed to cover a 2-year period.
Since this one has quite a bit of difference between the Senate and the House, I'll just review some of the major differences. In the Senate's position, it's a 1-year backfill. The House position is a 2-year backfill. The Senate position does not backfill any municipalities or counties. The House position backfills the lowest 8. So that's Bighorn County, Washakie County, Goshen County, Niobrara, Weston, Crook. Those are the counties that would benefit from this, the so-called hardship counties. In addition, unless a community has imposed the maximum mill levy, they are not eligible for this. So a good example of that is in Worland. They fall into the hardship, but they only impose 5 of the 8 mills for municipalities. So Worland would not be, and I just use that as one example, they would not benefit from this program. Secondly, they also have applied this to all special districts statewide, all special districts, whereas other than school districts, which technically are also special districts. So community colleges, weed and pest, irrigation, water development districts would all qualify, whereas under the Senate position, you have limited the qualifying special districts to those related to health and emergency management services.
Okay, turning over to the back side of your report, we will move on to the unrelated amendments. And these are amendments that passed on the House side that didn't have anything similar on the Senate side. H 2005, sponsored by Representative Lucas, pertains to the Secretary of State, the Administration Division. It adds $223,131 general fund and 2 full-time employee positions, adds a footnote specifying that the appropriation and positions are for registration and processing activities. And of this appropriation, it specifies how much will be doubled and included in the standard budget for the next biennium. And just as a note, the amount that doubles is the 12-month amount that'll go on into the next biennial budget. The amount that's appropriated is a 15-month amount because we have 15 months before the end of this biennium. H 3012, sponsored by Representative Larson Lloyd, pertains to the State Construction Department and the Operations Division. It increases $750,000 general funds and adds a footnote that specifies the increase is for a statewide strategic facility plan and comprehensive monitoring and reporting system, and that the appropriation is not effective if 2025 House Bill 86 is not enacted into law. H 3014, sponsored by Representative Lawley, pertains to the State Construction Department, School Facilities Division. It deletes footnote 1, specifying that expenditures from the appropriation shall not include maintenance of school district enhancements. And go ahead.
So this one just takes out the amendment that JAC added.
Correct. The last 4 amendments on your sheet all pertain to Section 345, the Natural Resource Litigation Account. So H 2034, sponsored by Representative Larson Lloyd, was a language change only, and it added the words acting in support of lawsuits defending, commencing, intervening, or prosecuting. The next amendment, H 3028, sponsored by Representative Knapp, deleted that Larson amendment, the H 2034. And then the next one, H 3043, sponsored by Chairman Baer, amends the subsection to add some words, and the wording is to acting in technical support of lawsuits defending, commencing, and intervening in or prosecuting lawsuits. And it also then deleted the Knapp and the prior Larson amendments. So that's the final language in that one. And then H 3029 corrected, sponsored by Representative Harshman, was also a language change to Section 345, and it amends subsection C, permitting the governor to use a portion of the appropriated funds for funding coal port leasing and construction. And that is all of the 19 amendments that the House passed. And Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to address any questions.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? Pretty straightforward, actually. Yeah, this is very good. What else? Anything else?
Typically, the committee would vote on the one page. You are not taking a position on any of the House amendments. This is merely to share the report, which is the universe of House amendments, with your colleagues on the Senate. And typically, that is voted on by the committee, and then the chairman signs the report. It is a report only. You're not endorsing or advocating those for those amendments.
Is there a second? Any discussion? It's a roll call. That's in the probably would be. Roll call?
Mr. Chairman, roll call vote on House Bill 0001. Senator Driscoll?
Aye.
Senator Larson?
Aye.
Senator Smith?
Aye.
And Chairman Salzar?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, 4 ayes, 1 excused.
Anything else?
Nope. Thank you very much.
I want to thank you and also staff. How really just really work and appreciate what you do and many guys. Is there any other?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Senator Smith.
I just have I don't expect you to have the number now, but if I could get the amount that's appropriated to the governor to use for funding on Coalport leasing and construction, if I get that number, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely, Senator Smith. So there was no new money added, but he has access to $3.6 million for litigation, and then the House added for coal ports.
Okay,
So it's language only, and it applies just to that 3.6 million.
got it. Thank you.
Okay, is there anything else, Mr. Richards?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So, that's really the only thing on the agenda, so we passed the report out. So, with that, I will